Welcome to the second part of this fascinating discussion where we're going to take the leap from cyber as a technological problem to cyber as a social and psychological problem. And that particular difference, the technology versus the psychology, is the subject of my own presentation. Cyber ends versus cyber means is really what I want to cover here. Now, as far as I know, and you'll have to ask Bjorn to confirm this, as far as I know, I'm here primarily because back this previous spring, I was given the opportunity to write an article for The Atlantic on what the United States can learn from the Nordics and Baltics about protecting elections. And that gave me a great chance to reach out to some truly brilliant and fascinating people in every country bordering the Baltic, with the exception of two, the second one being Germany. Pace, Germany, I like Germany. Then this opportunity to come here and speak with you gave me the opportunity to repeat that set of interviews in the United States. And so I went around interviewing a bunch of people in the United States, and I learned some interesting stuff. And one thing that I learned is that sometimes Americans like me think that we're better at things than we really are. And so you can see in my opening photograph, that's the US military liberating Norway in 1945. And we're being welcomed, thank you very much. And I'm not so sure we had that much to do with that particular liberation, well, at least not directly. So interviews. I really try to take a journalistic approach to this project, and it's interesting because in the United States these days, taking a journalistic approach makes you an enemy of the people. And so I wanted to give you an example of how journalists are supposed to behave in the United States these days. Not really. And the first person that I want to talk about, and I can't give you the names of these people because the interviews were either off the record or I'm sort of semi-direct quoting them. So if you want to, some of them I can identify later if you're really interested, but most of them I can't. So I can tell you that on the day before our elections this year, we had a visitor to Harvard, a gentleman who is in charge of election security for a very large American state, and who previously did similar work at the federal level. And he was generous enough to stop by Harvard on the day before the elections on his way to New York to be a talking head on one of our many fake news channels. And he spoke about cyber defense and the elections. I mean, again, this is his job, very senior official. And he began his talk by saying, we've got 4 threats we've got to deal with. Number 1, voting infrastructure. That's the machines that we use. And we've known that we've had specific vulnerabilities in our voting infrastructure since 2006, which was like, wow, that's a long time ago. Number 2, online voter information. There's just too much available in the United States in terms of our voter rolls. They can be tampered with. Number 3, the election night return system. And number 4, fake news and misinformation and disinformation on social media. Then he proceeded to give an excellent talk where he covered the first 3 in depth. And I learned a great deal. Didn't say anything about fake news or misinformation or disinformation. And so I had a chance to interview him following his talk. And I said, hey, you covered those first 3 topics really well. How come you never went back to cover the one about psychological resilience? And he said, oh man, that's too hard. We just don't know. There are no easy solutions. I didn't feel I had anything useful I could say. I don't know, maybe more media literacy education? He didn't know. And I assume he wasn't doing much about it. But to double check, I went and talked to an American diplomat. And I said, is this familiar to you? And he said, oh, Jed, let me tell you a story. Years ago, when I was working in Moscow, I was chatting with a Russian general about cyber defense. And we talked for a while. You know, you can't say that much, but we were having a nice conversation. And at some point, he claps me on the shoulder and he says in Russian, thank you so much. You just make my job so much easier. And the diplomat says, what do you mean? What do we do to make your job easier? And he says, when you talk about cyber defense, you have the conversation that we're having right now, where it's all about technology, offensive and defensive technology. Whereas when we look at cyber defense, we see it, as Sven pointed out earlier, we see it as just part of information warfare. And by ignoring that aspect, you just make our lives easy. You leave all this low-hanging fruit. It's wonderful, thank you. I learned that. So after that, I went to talk to a gentleman who was a senior White House official under President Obama. And I said, do these stories sound familiar to you? And he said, oh yeah, I'm in continual shock. He says, this goes back all the way to the beginning of the Obama administration. Every time we go to Congress to try to explain what's going on in terms of cyber and in terms of the vulnerabilities of our society, especially the psychological vulnerabilities of our society, our lack of trust in institutions, the rifts within our society, they say, so if we change the algorithm, will that be repaired? And over again, this seems to happen. And he was really just, he was not surprised that I had gotten these previous remarks. He said, you know, as we learned from our senior election official, it's too hard. At the risk of making Harvard look kind of silly, there was an otherwise excellent study done in 2017 at Harvard, not by me personally, but by some people who are much smarter. And they were interviewing campaign managers all over the 50 United States to try to determine how prepared they were to defend the political campaigns from cyber threats, figuring that those could be used as they were in 2016 in 2018. And the 2017 report was kind of devastating. It concluded that not only are they unprepared, this is the state and local American political campaign managers, not only are they unprepared in terms of cyber defenses, they don't care. They ranked cyber defense as low on their list of worries about running a campaign. And then, and this is sort of the part that is kind of embarrassing for Harvard, when the actual report came out, they never mentioned disinformation or misinformation or manipulated information on social media, et cetera, any kind of influence operations or active measures. It wasn't one of the questions they asked. So the questions they asked about technology, oof, the answers were disturbing. There were no questions about the non-technological aspects. Now, meanwhile, it's worth pointing out that the concept of integrated information warfare is part and parcel of the Kremlin's mindset and has been for a very long time. And you can note the use of technology in this old photograph. They're spouting the predecessor to Russophobia. And even though they have the horn, the tools are human. Information warfare is an old word. Disinformation is an old concept. And I think that in the United States, we are fixated for one reason or another in not looking at this in a historical and in a societal way, and instead focusing on technological quick fixes, technological threats and technological fixes. There's one more American interview that I want to summarize. I had a chance to interview or communicate with the gentleman who headed the cybersecurity research program at the National Science Foundation. And he had lots of time to talk because right now he's on furlough because my government is shut down. So he had plenty of time. And I'm going to read you his quote because I think it's worth reading in the entirety. I have a few quotes that if time permits I want to read. I think computer science folks are trained to look for technological problems and technological solutions and not looking enough at the human aspects. I've said in several public fora that we, the computer science community, were so focused on manipulating elections by hacking voting machines and to a lesser extent voter registration systems that we missed the risk of hacking people, that is social manipulation. The technical cybersecurity folks are very good at the adversarial mindset, thinking like an attacker, but we focus on the technical aspects of how an attack happens, and therefore the technical techniques that can stop them. It would be useful to encourage both communities to talk more to each other. I find in talking to some of the sociologists that they're just as ignorant about technology and what can and can't be done as computer scientists are about the human aspects. And I can assure you, as a social scientist, that is true. All right, meanwhile, back in the Nordic-Baltic region, the kind of cross-disciplinary collaboration that our furloughed friend was describing was something that I learned while conducting my separate set of interviews in the spring. It seems, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems from the interlocutors that I had that this kind of cross-disciplinary, cross-sector, and even cross-governmental collaboration is something that is going on and has been going on for in some states a very long time, in some states a shorter period of time, but still a few years, in this region. And I want to read you, and this is my article. And I want to read you some quotes from this article that are really just channeling folks that I interviewed in this region. Given the emphasis placed on cyber defenses and social media algorithms in many American conversations about disinformation, it is surprising how rarely Northeast European officials emphasize technical solutions to the problem. It really did shock me. Everyone took cyber seriously, and almost no one I spoke to in this region would discuss cyber defense with me without mentioning psychological resilience of the population. Another quote. Unfortunately, though, many of the advantages Northeast Europeans have against disinformation may not exist in the US. Your ability to implement whole-of-government solutions relatively easily is enviable, but challenged to recreate in the United States. Similar are your typically high levels of institutional trust. Quote, the greatest strength the Danes possess, says a Danish foreign ministry official, is the high amount of trust toward our government and institutions in general. This makes it harder to sow distrust and polarize debates. That's a description of the exact opposite of the United States right now. It is a superpower that you have in this region, and one that I envy, and I hope that, that we can imitate someday. More on that shortly. One more quote from an Estonian cyber defense expert, which I think gives you the whole story, and there it is. It's hard to build cyber resilience without education. In the face of info ops, you have to empower your citizens to be good citizens with critical thinking, media literacy, and political awareness. I'm not exactly sure why this is, and why the United States seems to have a blind spot here. I'm wondering, is it our institutional weaknesses? Is it your history? I mean, perhaps your familiarity with these kind of techniques dates back far enough that you have a history of looking at this without looking at it through a technological lens. Maybe. Or maybe there's just an American tendency to always leap to the quick fix. I don't know the answer. All right. It's easy to be hard on the United States these days, so I'm going to go with a very optimistic conversation that I had with a group of American information operations officers. They really impressed me. For one thing, I asked them about cyber defense, and they said, how about we talk about cyber offense? I think we'll give you a better idea of what's really going on. I said, great. And one of them said, let me describe to you our methodology. Quote, point to point, the officer is tasked to achieve a product. First, I analyze the target audience. Then I determine the desired effect. I come up with the best way to deliver the message, and the resulting behavior change is my product. Cyber's just a vehicle for me. And then he clarified, he said, you can use cyber for criminal activity. You can use it for espionage. You can use cyber to steal money, to steal intellectual property, to possibly get access to military plans. But when you're using cyber for influence operations, the way these gentlemen do, you're using cyber strictly as a delivery mechanism. And he went further. If I'm shutting down someone's sewage system, it's not because I like human sludge. It's because I'm looking to achieve a particular reaction. It's still about hitting the human psyche, even when you're attacking systems. Sewage, finance, energy, whatever. Yeah, I'll move along. He also pointed out, or actually his colleague pointed out, that cyber doesn't equal information operations, but the influence aspect is huge, especially when you're dealing with Russia and China. And finally, he said, cyber doesn't hold territory. And I was kind of confused because I'm like, well, it could help. And he clarified, well, it can help you take it, and it can help you hold it, but only via influencing human behavior. Okay. That was it for my optimism, and now I'm going to close on some disturbing notes. This is an anecdote. I'm lucky enough to have a diverse group of friends on Facebook, and one of them is an expert at the Pentagon who's been in a lot of different places. And he posted a fairly interesting, somewhat lightweight, but fairly interesting Australian article on great power conflict with Beijing and the need to have the United States more engaged in the Western Pacific, an Australian point of view. And this was what he said on Facebook. And it's the kind of thing that he shares all the time. And here's some reactions that came in. First reaction. Now we're too busy making sure trainees can get surgeries and kill themselves. So first reaction, hey, guys, there's a potential for great power conflict. with the rising China, especially in the Western Pacific. Our Navy is at risk. I hate the left. I really hate the American left. That's what we're spending our money on. Reaction number 2. Okay, once again, I hate the left. Number 3, and this one's worth reading. So the reactions go on and on. And I clarified. I talked to the official and I said, can you just confirm to me that these aren't bots? I mean, these guys, they're sounding like they're being broadcast from St. Petersburg. You know, they're saying you don't have a great power problem, you have an internal problem, and you should hate the other side, your domestic left. And he confirmed that these are all veterans. These are all people who he's served with in the field versus America's enemies. And here they are, and just the numbers are, these were the first 3 comments. About 50% of the total comments on this particular post were of a similar nature. Yeah. So the way that the foreign disinformation and the organic disinformation that's rooted in social divisions is so effective is something that I think it's really dangerous to lose sight of, and they reinforce each other. And sometimes you can't tell the difference. I honestly had to ask, are these real people? They're not only real people, they're service members. All right. The Nieman Fellows. This is probably the most prestigious program for journalists at Harvard. And I have a picture of the Saints game right there because the head of the Nieman Fellows happens to be the only person at Harvard who's as passionate about the New Orleans Saints as I am. So that's for him. So he asked the question of these senior American journalists, will the quality of information we use to make political choices get any better? You know, what's the future here? And here's one answer. Essentially, the mainstream political parties don't have the answers to the underlying questions that the population needs answers to. And then number 2, we built this stuff to do this. A lot of you have had conversations with the folks who work at Facebook, who work at Twitter, and they built these platforms to be emotive and to communicate attention-getting thoughts. So we did it on purpose. And then finally, I'm going to close with one more quote from The Atlantic, which is also a quote from a Baltic minister. The stakes presented by disinformation are remarkably high. In the long run, the contest of narratives is about core post-war values such as multilateralism, individual rights, and the rule of law. If we are serious about defending Western values, now is the time. Disinformation is a very efficient weapon to demotivate people, to create doubt in leadership. The vacuum is never empty, but is filled by populism or nationalism or radicalism. We are just starting to realize this is real. Ends versus means. Something to think about.